When I was about 8, I was kidnapped from my foster parents by my natural father. I didn't know it at the time, but I became the first openly gay black police officer in the Metropolitan Police. I found myself standing on a train station wanting to kill myself. If I was to deny my homosexuality, I was empowering the people who hated me. You have to own it. If you don't, other people will own it for you.
We're building the world's largest archive of LGBTQ+, global majority and migrant stories. Every voice you hear helps preserve our shared history and inspire the next generation. If our mission speaks to you, show your support, subscribe to our channel, and share your story in the comments below. One voice, one story at a time. This is Oral Histories.
A little bit about myself. Well, I grew up in London. My father was Nigerian, my mother was Jamaican. I was fostered for the first 8 years of my life with a white foster family in a little village in Kent. I was a product of a thing that was called farming back then, which happened mainly for West African communities. When I was about 8, I was kidnapped from my foster parents by my natural father. And I went from this sleepy little village in Kent to Harlesden in London, and literally went from overnight from being the only black kid in the village to suddenly I'm in a sea of blackness. I'm feeling lost. When I got to 16, my father sent me to Nigeria, told me I was going on holiday. When I got there, they took my passport off me and said, "You're not going back." A story that quite a few people have experienced. And while I was there for 8 years. A year of that, I was actually homeless under a bridge in Lagos. Came back to the UK in 87. I was full of a lot of anger and resentment. And I think the thing I was really looking for, I wanted to belong. I never felt I belonged anywhere. And I was looking for that sense of belonging. I also hated the fact that I was black. Suppressed my sexual orientation. For a long time, I believed it's something that would change at some point. If I find the right girl, things will change. That didn't happen. Joined the police. I felt that if I could hide behind the uniform. During my policing career, did various things, but also got to a point where I think my world started to cave in. And in about 2001, 2002, I found myself standing on a train station wanting to kill myself. I didn't, but it was a big turning point. And I had a very, very good counselor who helped me through that, helped me find my identity. And I realized that the thing that my epiphany, for want of a better phrase, was, oh my God, I have to own my story. That became my purpose, my mission, to own my story. Came back to work, went to work in the diversity training unit at the time, which because of Stephen Lawrence, there was a lot of money paid into it. So that we were given 5-star training as facilitators. It was absolutely brilliant. And that also encouraged me to look at myself. I then came out. I didn't know it at the time, but I became the first openly gay black police officer in the Metropolitan Police. Did the Pride speech at the Gay Pride rally 2 weeks after I came out. And the rest is history, as they say.
How would you describe your identity in terms of gender, sexuality, and cultural background?
In terms of gender, I'm male. Sexual orientation, gay. Cultural background, I always find that interesting because I think visibly I'm black. But I'm a mixture of Nigerian, Jamaican, and British. So I think I'm kind of Anglo-African Caribbean.
And you mentioned farming earlier. Can you go into a bit of detail of what that means and what that involved?
You ever heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child? Right now, if you're in West, I don't know about the cultures you come from, but if you go to the West African communities or African communities, the whole village raises the family. Right? You know, you could wake up in the morning in one house, have lunch in another house, and you're sleeping in another house. There's family compounds. What used to happen back in Nigeria is that the kids would be staying in the compounds while the parents would go off to university, go and get a job, get themselves settled. And then they'd come back and pick up the kids. And then there's their job to sort of like raise the next generation of kids as well. When a lot of my parents' generation came to the UK, they didn't have that support network around them. So they were looking for something to fill that cultural niche, for want of a better phrase. And what happened, I'm not sure how it started, but private fostering arrangements started to come into play. And what would happen is they would pay families to take care of their children. In fact, there was a documentary made about it that won a BAFTA last year, I think it was, called Black Nanny, White Child. Talking to people who were from, there's probably 80, 90,000 of us across the country who had this various different experiences around farming. And they called it farming as like you were farmed out.
I mean, I first learned about farming through an EastEnders storyline. I had no idea about it prior to that. So can you talk a little bit about how you feel it may have impacted you growing up, finding out about your roots and how that may have affected you?
Yeah. How long have you got? I'm still unraveling that question. And I think a lot of it is about acceptance of the journey that I've had, as opposed to resenting or getting angry about it. I mean, growing up with my foster parents, they were very loving, lots of hugs, lots of laughter. But I was always aware that I was an outsider. I didn't know anything about race or anything like that. You know, I just knew that there were always jokes made about me and stuff like that. So I always had this feeling that, yes, there were hugs, but I was always different. I remember my foster mother used to say to me things like, I used to give away sweets, all my sweets. And even as a kid, that thing, when you talk about belonging, it's not something that's a thought. Belonging is a feeling. And I think it's a feeling that innately you want it. Your psyche needs it. Your core needs it to grow or stuff like that. And the things that you try and do to fill that emptiness, so to speak. I just didn't feel like I belonged. When I was about 8, my natural father turned up and I didn't know who this man was. And he took me from an all-white environment, which I'd been at since I was about 2-3 months old, into this totally all-black environment. And I went into an environment where everybody looked like me, but I didn't have anything in common with them again. So again, that feeling of not belonging was there. My parents' response to this was I was a problem child. I don't think they had the emotional intelligence to understand that dynamic. It was almost like as soon as I was taken from there to here, I was expected to fit in. And if I didn't fit in, I was beaten. So between 8 and 16, I spent a lot of time with social services. In fact, social services practically became part of the family. I spent a lot of time in children's homes. My father was taken to court for beating me for the brutalities that he inflicted upon me. And I was just lost. I was lost as a kid. I just didn't know where I fitted in society.
And how do you feel your identity has evolved over time?
I've had to learn to own my story. We all have unique experiences. And, we may share certain characteristics like color or religion or whatever, but actually our stories are individual. You can have 6 siblings in the same house and all have a different experience of growing up in that house. So I had to learn to accept my individuality as well as those other aspects of my identity. And I think I had to look in the mirror. I spent a lot of time looking in the mirror and saying, who am I? And I had to be careful not to define myself through other people's eyes. There are a lot of people who want to put their expectations upon you. Because you're X, you must behave in a certain way, or you must feel a certain way, or you must. And I'm sort of like, because of the mixture of experiences I've had, some of those things didn't fit with me. So I had to figure out, one, what it meant to be black to me. not what it meant to be black in the black community, but first of all, what does that mean to me? And what does being gay mean to me? And that's a journey that took me about 2 years to work through that. Although in some ways I'm still working through it, but I'm in a place where I'm loving my story now. I used to see my story as a burden, and now it's a joy.
How does your identity as a gay man fit into your story now?
It's a part of who I am. Right? I prefer to say I'm a man who happens to be gay and black, rather than I'm a gay black man. Right? And in the same way I love jazz music or stuff like that. It's aspects of my identity, and they're not the total sum of who I am.
Have there been any cultural or religious influences that have shaped your journey?
When I was with my foster parents, I used to go to Sunday school. I remember going to Sunday school. When I got to my natural parents, it was from Sunday school to the mosque. And the way in which Islam was taught to us was via the stick. Right? And it initially gave me a hatred of the religion. But then as I grew up, I realized it wasn't the religion, it was the way in which it was practiced in our house. I remember my mum, twice, this has happened when I was probably about 12 or 13, I had this feeling I was different. And we were watching Larry Grayson on the Generation Game, for those of you who are old enough to remember who he was. And the lights were off in the living room. And I'm sitting there, my sisters were sitting next to me, and my mum was lying on the sofa behind me. And for some reason, my sister said, "Mummy, what would you do if you thought Gamal was gay?" And my mum, being a loving mother that she is, said, "I would shove a red hot poker right up his ass." And that said to me, I can't tell anybody about this. Years later, after my father, I came out just before my father died. Not to my father, but to the rest of the family. And after my father died, my mum called me round and sat down and read all these passages from the Quran to me and told me that my body, when I die, if I don't change, when I die, my body's going to be cut into 1,000 pieces, and each piece will burn in eternity forevermore. And she sat there for about half an hour giving me this lecture. And then she looked at me as if to say, I've proved my point. And I looked at her and I said, that doesn't have the impact on me you want it to have. I'm not on that path. That doesn't mean... And I remember the look of fear that came across my mom's face, as if to say, I can't control him. And I think I've learned that it's not the religion that condemns me. It's the way in which certain people practice it. And I think they're two very different things, because you can meet some Muslims or Christians or Buddhists or whatever who are wonderful people who embody this spirit of love and inclusion and acceptance. And then you get these people who use that same book to demolish you. And I think that goes back to the thing of you need to be able to stand on your own 2 feet, stand in your space and say, this is me.
And you've touched on this a little bit earlier. So you're talking about your story of moving from place to place. What brought you to London, and what was the transition like for you?
Well, I was born and grew up in London. So when I was 16, I was sent to Nigeria. I was in Nigeria for 8 years. What brought me back? Luck. A miracle. 1986, I had decided if I didn't leave Nigeria by the end of that year, I was going to kill myself. And I had this envelope with all these tablets in. And I remember having it in the bathroom thinking, December 31st, if I'm still here, I'm going to take those tablets. And that'll be the end of it. Because I wasn't getting anywhere in Nigeria. I was just drifting. I'm a kid from London, so I'm in the middle of this. And then somebody came to me and said, you're from London, right? And I said, yeah. And they said, we've got this lump of gold. There's some white people that work here. If you can sell that lump of gold to them, you can keep half the money and buy yourself a ticket back to London. And I thought, okay. And I took this lump of gold, went to meet this white guy called Richard and showed him this lump of gold. He invited me around to his house. He took it out, scraped it, and it turned out to be a lump of lead, sprayed gold. And then he looked at me and said, "You've been used." And I said, "Yeah." But that became a friendship. And where we were living at the time, he was the only white English guy there. And I'm from London. So every time I went to his house, it was like being in a little part of England. And then his wife came over for a holiday. And at the end of the holiday, we were sitting down talking. By this time, we're now into 1987. And we're sitting down talking. And he says, "Why don't you go back to the UK?" I said, "How am I going to get back? I've got no money. I don't even know where my passport is." I said, "I've got no hope of ever going back." My parents didn't respond to any of my letters. So he said, "I'll tell you what, when my wife gets back, we'll get you a new passport." A few weeks later, I went around his house and we were sitting there talking, and he throws an envelope across the table. Inside this envelope was my passport and a first-class ticket back to London. And he said, "You mustn't ask me why." I still get emotional about that. When somebody comes along and basically gives you back your life. I arrived back in London, July 1987. Got out. I realized that I had left London as a kid and come back as an adult. And they were two totally different worlds. The world had changed a lot in those 8 years. Okay? Things that I came back and expected to see weren't there. The whole world had changed. I was born in the UK, I had a British passport, and I walked into Barclays Bank and said I wanted to open up a bank account. And the guy just looked at me and said, "We don't open accounts for Nigerians." And I said, "I'm British, I was born here, this is my passport." "Okay, we don't want your business." And that hurt. And I think that was not my first, but that was the first time I was conscious of being racially profiled and not having no power over it. You know, this is being done to me and I have no comeback. That felt really hard.
Have you faced discrimination in relation to your sexual orientation?
Okay. The reason why I'm sort of thinking on that, before I came out, I was conscious of homophobia, but not directly towards me because nobody knew I was gay. As a lot of my friends say, you're very straight passing. When I came out, one of the things I think I've learned, I know I've learned, is that once I owned who I was, it didn't matter what people thought of me. I didn't listen to it. I wasn't interested. This is not your story. You have no say. So irrespective of what your views are, I don't care. I'm going to be with me for the rest of my life. You're not. I remember once, there were little things. I remember once I was doing a workshop and I was talking about being gay. And one of the delegates at the end of the day comes up to me and she says, "I've got something for you. I want to give you a gift." And I said, "Okay." And she goes, "Yes." And she brings out these Christian leaflets. And she starts telling me about this workshop. Is it a workshop? No, a retreat that I can go on to change myself to normal. And I looked at her and I said, "Isn't it interesting how you think I need your approval to be me?" And she just didn't like the fact that I'm sorry, thank you very much, but I'm comfortable with who I am. No, I can fix you. These can fix you. I'm not broken. And I think that was the biggest thing, just owning it. And even when I talk to people today, I said, if you want to, whatever it is, your color, your gender, sexual orientation, I said, you have to own it. You have to own it. If you don't, other people will own it for you. There was a quote which was very, very, very empowering for me, Bayard Rustin, the black gay activist of the 1960s. And there's a quote of his, which is one of my favorite quotes. He said, "I learnt early on that if I was to deny my sexual orientation or my sexuality, my homosexuality, he called it back then. If I was to deny my homosexuality, I was empowering the people who hated me. I like that. I'm not going to give you the power to make me feel less than I am.
So we just want to talk a little bit about work life now. How did being a Black person or a gay person shape that journey, and what was the impact of that in the space that you were working in?
Initially, because I did so many different jobs before I became a police officer. So I was a magician for a while. I was a poultry farmer. I was a bodyguard. I was a store detective. I was a welder. But all of those were just about getting money. So I wasn't really thinking about color or anything like that. Joining the police, one of the main reasons why I wanted to join the police, some of the main reasons. One, I wanted to hide. But the other reason was I hated being Black. And I wanted that badge so I could say to people, I'm not one of them, I'm one of you. When I first joined, I was homophobic and racist. I would go out of my way to stop and search as many Black people as I could. So I could say to my colleagues, look, I'm one of you, I'm not one of them. I would be the one cracking homophobic or racist jokes in the canteen. In fact, in the early part of my career, I probably helped people to justify their prejudices. Yeah, I started to question myself, hang on, wait, what's going on here? I joined a team. I was selected to join a team, which as a result of Stephen Lawrence was set up to recruit, develop, and retain people from minority backgrounds. And I was selected to be part of this team. And that was my first foray, my first stepping into the water of what inclusion, diversity, and all these things were about. And that started to open my eyes to a few things. We worked with such a dynamic, diverse group. It was fantastic. We had a white gay guy, we had a Muslim, we had a lesbian, we had me. It was such a mix, but the energy was brilliant. And then when people started to talk about stories, and that's when I started to think about who I was and what it meant to me. So in a strange way, the police helped me to find me. And probably for the last 15 years of my career in the police service, I dedicated my life to equality, diversity, and inclusion. I used to go to work, wearing African clothes and stuff like that. And I remember one of my colleagues once, we were in a meeting and I'm there in Nigerian dress. And she leans over and she goes, G, we know you're Black. You don't have to prove it. I said, this is not about proving it. It's about being comfortable. And I think that's the space where I learned that I have to be me. You own my professional space. I own this. I own me.
Was there a particular, if you're thinking back now, a particular moment or experience where you had a turning point or shift in your perspective from the race and the homophobia?
It's not as simple as that. There were moments, but I think it's a journey. It's a continuum. For example, when I first joined, when I was at Hendon, I allowed people to paint me white because I felt that that's what I wanted to do, had to do to fit in. And in fact, it was in the film. That scene was in the film. And I felt that's what I had to do to fit in. So that was a moment, but that didn't become a turning point, or I didn't understand the significance of that until later, towards when I'd grown a bit. At the time, it was a laugh. Coming out and doing a speech at the Gay Pride rally, I think that was a big thing. Walking out on stage at Trafalgar Square in full uniform and just sort of standing there and just like, yeah, sorry. There was a moment there. I was drunk. But don't tell anyone. No. The interesting thing around it, right? I felt at the time that if I come out and I say this is who I am and stuff, all my life is going to be now roses and everything's going to be happy and da da da. That didn't happen. It was just, yeah, okay, that's one less thing to deal with. But that moment was, yeah. I think one of the biggest moments was, for me, I had a coming out song. And that song was Labi Siffre's Something Inside So Strong. I played that song to death. There was just something about the words of that song that spoke to me. And I was invited, after doing the Gay Pride speech, I was invited to the National Black Gay Men's Conference as the keynote speaker. And it was at a place, I think it was Notting Hill or somewhere. And I turned up at this venue. And as I walked in, there was a poster of me, a huge poster of me on the stage. And I'm like, whoa. And as I walked in, people were like, that's him, that's him, that's him. And I went over and I sat down at the speaker's table, so to speak. And I'm sitting at the speaker's table, feeling kind of chuffed. And I turned around to speak to the guy sitting next to me. And it was Labi Siffre. And I'm like, this is, whoa. It was just one of those, that's your song. And I said, what are you doing here? And he goes, I'm going to introduce the keynote speaker. And I thought, the lucky so-and-so. And he went up and he read a poem and he did a little speech and then he introduced the keynote speaker. And all these people stood up, sort of standing ovation. I'm standing up thinking, where is this guy? And then suddenly there was that moment when I said, oh my God, they're talking about me. And I remember walking up onto that speech, looking around this room at all these people giving me a standing ovation. Standing there thinking, 20 years or so before, I was sleeping under a bridge in Lagos. Now I'm standing in a room receiving a standing ovation. So that was a moment. Another moment was when we made the film. And there's loads of other little moments in between, but these were just probably the biggest ones. We made the film. It was released. I was happy with that. We've made this little film. It's nice. It's gone out. Making the film was intense. Cherish and I didn't always see eye to eye. So there was a lot of challenges there. In fact, it was one of those things, for her, it was her film. And I'm saying, it's my story. And that was a clash between that. But then the film came out and then I remember I get a phone call saying, we've been selected for the BAFTA. And I'm like, okay, that's nice. Yeah, cool. And then I think it was a couple of weeks later, we've now been shortlisted. Oh, okay, cool. And then I think it was a week or so later, I was in the car in Tesco's, just done my shopping, and Cherish rings. He goes, we've been nominated. And I remember sitting there in the car thinking, what the fuck is going on? And I just burst into tears. I just sat there crying, thinking, I can't believe this is happening. And the reason why, so I can feel the tears coming into my eyes. The reason why that impacted me so much, one of my core values now is that we have to own our stories. We have to own our stories. I've had so many incredible experiences because of sharing my story. My story has taken me around the world to places I never ever thought I would visit. I've been in countries where people don't talk about being gay. And I'm standing there saying, I'm a proud Black gay man. And it's just, there's a power to that. So to get to that point where they say we're nominated for a BAFTA, for me, that was a validation of that belief. On the night of the ceremony, we were out there. And I remember we were sitting next to each other. And it came to our category. This cameraman came and he was on the floor in front of us, filming us as they were naming all the categories. And they said, and the winner is the Black cop. And I remember Cherish and I just turned to each other, just sat there staring at each other. We just froze. And then somebody whispered, you need to get on stage. And walking up on that stage, there's a video of it. Right? And if you look at it, Cherish is doing the speech. I'm standing behind them. And in my head, I'm thinking, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, I don't even know where to start. I want to say it's a huge collective win to every underrepresented group that the film speaks to directly and indirectly. This is for us, man. All the outsiders, all the people that's been told you're not good enough. This is for us.
And I'm just in this place of just looking around. One, I'm comfortable on stage, but it was just that disbelief in that moment, what happened in that moment, it said to me, be open to life. This was never part of the plan. I never set out to say, one day I'm going to make a film and get a BAFTA. It wasn't that wasn't nowhere on my agenda. And in that moment, it just said, forget about plans. Just be open. Because while you've got a plan going this way, there's stuff over here. The magic is not in the plan. So just be open. And then some of the feedback I started to get from around the world. If I could share a story, there's loads of moments I could give to, but there was one, there's a gym I go to, and there's a young lad who works on the reception, Diran. And one day I'm walking in, he goes, "Gee, excuse me," he said, "when you finish, can I have a chat?" And I said, "Yeah." So I went back to him and I said, "What is it?" And he goes, "Your film came up on my feed, YouTube feed." I said, "Oh, wow." And he goes, "Yeah, I watched it." And he goes, I said, "What did you think?" And he said, "I've never said this to anyone before." He said, "I'm half Indian." He said, "But I've always denied my Indian side because I wanted to be white." He said, "I never realized I was doing it. Your film made me realize that." He said, "And then I made my family watch the film." He said, "Our family had the most amazing discussion as a result of that, some of the stuff." He said, "It changed our family dynamic." One of the things he said that happened, that they would bully his sister. Him and his brother would bully their younger sister because she was proud of her Indian side. And they would bully her. And they didn't realize what they were doing. His mom's white, his dad's Indian. They spoke about their relationship and how they got together. He said, there were stories that we've never shared before. And that made me feel good. That's why I share my story, because I want those moments. I don't want people to share moments with me. I want people to find something about themselves. Listening to this interview or watching it on a laptop or their phone, hiding under the duvet, scared. And I have this thing that I want them to feel something about, you can get through this. You can be strong. You can be you. It's okay. And that's what's happened for me. I've seen that happen time and time again. And I may be financially poor, but in here, I've got a wealth of positive stories.